first of all kicking off with introductions. So we'll be kicking off with introductions by DECC and ourselves and Deloitte. We'll then be given an overview and an introduction to LIFE. I suppose setting out the European context and where I suppose the policy itself is coming from and what we're trying to fund. Then we'll be looking at what the overall project is and what makes a good project and how that fits in with the award criteria. At this stage, we'll be taking a break and then moving on to the application itself in some further detail. So that's the agenda. I'm just going to pass over to Jerry Clabby in the department now, and hopefully it's a good morning and interactive. And again, if you have any questions, please don't be shy and put them into the chat function.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jerry Clabby. I'm head of the Environment Advisory and Research Unit, and we are the national contact point for LIFE in Ireland. So we'd like to welcome you very much here this morning. We're delighted to be partnering this morning with Deloitte in bringing you this bid writing workshop. I just also wanted to add a couple of words, because since we had our information day there a little while ago, okay, I think somebody is telling me the sound isn't very good. So
not at my side. I can hear you very clear.
Okay.
I don't hear an echo.
Sound is fine for me as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll keep going then. Okay, in relation to Brian, if you just go back. Well, yeah, just to say that since we had our information day, the ministers decided to offer co-financing arrangements via the Climate Action Fund for successful LIFE bids under the Standard Action project category of LIFE. So Brian, the next slide there, please. So you'll see that for standard action projects that are successful in securing funding under the LIFE program in 2021 and projects that are considered to meet the criteria for funding under the Climate Action Fund, and following a competitive evaluation process, there is potential there to obtain up to 30% additional funding on top of the 60% funding which would be offered via the EU LIFE program. The next slide there, Brian. Now, all of the information is set out on the Climate Action Fund, the Department's Climate Action Fund webpage. Our colleagues in the Climate Action Fund will be more than happy to answer any queries you may have. So at the moment, applications for funding under this co-financing scheme are open, but the turnaround time is quite short. So applications have to be received before 12 noon on the 15th of October. And the details are there. And if you have queries, I know I see people already putting some queries into the chat function. We'll either try and answer them during the session or we'll come back to you later today. And our colleagues on the Climate Action Fund at that email address at the bottom there, climateactionfund@dec.gov.ie, are available to help you in relation to this also. And then just finally to say, as the national contact point, we're always available to assist applicants, whether you're considering making an application this year or perhaps next year. We'd really welcome early contact. We think that's very beneficial, both in terms of ourselves being able to provide as much assistance as we can and to provide any insights we may have, because we're in touch with the Commission all the time. This is obviously a new LIFE program, and there are things that we're learning about the program all the time. So I think it's very much in your interest, if you're considering making an application, to contact ourselves. So finally, I just want to wish you all the best for this morning's session, and I'll hand back over to Brian now with Deloitte. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I suppose that's really interesting to see that initiative that's been taken there, and I suppose it makes it a much more attractive scheme for companies and claimants then as they're looking at life. So if we would encourage anyone to get in touch with Climate Action Fund team then on that front. I suppose for a lot of people, you're probably more familiar with Deloitte in terms of accountancy, and you're probably wondering why are a bunch of accountants talking to us about putting a European funding application together. I suppose what you may not know about Deloitte itself is that I suppose we've got the largest grants and incentives practice in Europe, and if not the world. We've got over 800 professionals working in the area of grants and incentives, and that's across over 50 countries. In Europe itself, we've got our European Funding Centre of Excellence, and that's led out by Corian Visser, who will be speaking to you in length today about life and putting an application together. And I suppose by having a cross-European team, it means that we've got input from obviously across Europe. We can, I suppose, specialise in various different types of funding and various different, I suppose, areas of technology within that. And I suppose, as well as the local contacts that we have, then it means that we're in a position to see, I suppose, really what's come through with the Commission. I suppose what's best practice in terms of the wide number of applications that are being put in across Europe. And I suppose that's given us a very successful track record. In the last couple of years, we've had over 75% success rate on life projects alone. You know, we've accumulated millions of funding for our clients, and I suppose it just kind of sets out that there's a big experienced team here, and hopefully, you know, some of our best practice will be able to come through to you and assist you in your applications. Apologies, I realised that I hadn't actually introduced myself at any stage this morning. So my name is Brian Mcdonald. I'm a senior manager in the grants and incentives practice in Dublin. I've been working in the area for the last 10 years, worked on life applications in the past, as well as I suppose many kind of innovation incentives as well. Corian will introduce himself at his session, but we also have Susan Hansen from our Dutch office, and Shania from the Brussels office as well, who will be able to talk through the application. So I'm going to hand over to Corian, who will talk you through, I suppose, an introduction to life, which won't be quite as philosophical as the title sets out. But Corian, if I can pass it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. So to introduce myself, so my name is Corian Visser. I'm the leader of the Center of Excellence on EU funding. It's a team of approximately, well, now up to 100 specialists on EU funding all over Europe. And we're servicing our clients with identification of grants, applying grants, but also the execution of funded projects. So a little bit on myself. I have a scientific background as a medical biologist, worked in science for 10 years, moved to a biotech company for 3 years, and then since 2003 in the consultancy, innovation consultancy and grants and incentives. So I have extensive experience in all kinds of funding applications, but focusing mainly on projects with a biology background and European projects. So it gives you a bit of idea who I am and what I do. So over now to some background on the life, and I thought maybe it's good to start with a background on EU funding, because of course life is an EU funding, and what you have to realize is that all funding instruments are actually political instruments. So and the funding is just an instrument of a government to get their policy ambitions realized. And for that reason, it's good to step back and see where it is coming from. And so I like to go back then to Europe 2020, which has been the strategy of the European Commission for the policies in 2020 to reach at 2020. And then you saw on the left side of the slide, you see flagship initiatives, smart growth, but also sustainable growth and inclusive growth as the main themes. Well, there's already that sustainability in, and that has been extended now in 2020 with the new Europe 2030 strategy by adding the Green Deal policy. And the Green Deal policy is really important, of course, for the current discussions because it relates to everything related to sustainability. But if you're writing an European application, you also have to respond to the other objectives of well, it's good to respond also to the other objectives of the European Commission and the other policy objectives. So if you can make a relation to smart growth, well, the digital agenda, inclusive growth, not leaving anyone behind. These are important topics also to address in your application. So if you can make that link, it will be good. So that's why I would just introduce a little bit on the political context. If you can go to the next slide and then zoom in on the Green Deal policy. Brian, you can move to the next slide. Yes. So what is the Green Deal policy? Well, I guess you have all heard of it, of the ambition of European Commission to become climate neutral by 2050. Well, in the meantime, they have also launched the Fit for 55. So that means that they want to have a 55% reduction by 2030 and on the greenhouse gas, greenhouse gas emissions. So, and that is all to realize this Green Deal ambitions. What is a Green Deal? Actually, it's a set, it's a combination, it's a collection of all kinds of policies to reach these ambitions. And at 2050, it's on energy saving, on greenhouse gas emissions, zero pollution. It's about recycling, but also on increasing or recovering, preserving, restoration of biodiversity. It's on sustainable food. So it's a real big complex of policies, but they all feed in to this LIFE program. And again, you see here also, leave no one behind is also to have that impact not only in Western Europe, but also maybe in less advanced regions. They also have to move in the same direction. And if your application having a contribution to that, it will be better than just focusing on your own project and maybe very local. So that's a little bit on the background, the Green Deal. Then we go to the next slide. Of course, the LIFE program is not the only program that's out there. And it's also not the only program that focuses on sustainability or supporting sustainability ambitions of the European Commission. There are many more programs that you can find, and if you look on the bottom, you see a line from proof of concept, validation, market introduction. So from basic idea up to product in the market. You see there are different instruments at the European Commission. And well, I always tell you, so if you're doing something innovative, something new, and it has a link with that European ambition, with these European ambitions and policy goals. And actually, it doesn't matter whether it's just a fundamental idea or it is a product close to the market or introducing in the market. In all these different stages, there are funding opportunities. So don't be desperate. That's the message. If you see your project doesn't fit in life in the end, most probably, if it's a good project, if it has a link with a European policy, if it's innovative, something new, then probably there will be other funding around, and that's basically the message in this slide. And then you take over this slide, maybe.
Yeah, no, I suppose just to bring it into an Irish context, given the audience that's here, and I suppose there are other options outside of European funding. And I suppose one of the things that Corian's kind of touching on in terms of the projects and set out for them is there are certain requirements for life in terms of, you know, the scale, the ambition of the project, and, you know, the fact that it's a demonstration project as opposed to more of a research focus. And I suppose just in terms of Irish funding that's available, and for, I suppose we've probably got a bit of a company focus on this, but looking at various different types of funding that are available to companies. So anyone under the charge of corporation tax, if there's an element of development that's there, and you're meeting certain criteria, then, you know, there's a 25% tax credit that's available. You know, if your project is more on the leaning on the research side of it, you know, but you're developing a new technology, you've got the Disruptive Technology Innovation Fund, which you can apply for as part of a consortium. You know, you may be in Enterprise Ireland or IDA client, and you could be looking at RD&I funding. You know, you might be at that very early stage, and you may need some academic input into the project. And at that point, you know, looking at innovation partnerships with EI or IDA, looking at SFI research collaborations, you know, or there's SEAI have funding, and, you know, a range of other government bodies have funding. And then, as Corian has set out, I suppose, you know, if it's a technology project, it might be something slightly more, you know, of a bigger scale than life itself. Then, you know, there's the EU Innovation Fund, but then there's also a range of different types of funding available for research aspects, available through Horizon Europe. So, and I suppose part of this is coming from the pre-attended survey that we sent out. Some of the projects that we'd have seen, or some of the ideas, I suppose, you mightn't be quite at the stage where you're at the kind of demonstration of the technology, and there's other types of funding that may be more applicable. I suppose for the people who've done that and we're talking to them in the one-to-ones, we'll be able to touch on that in more detail. But as Corian said, if your project isn't fit for life, you know, and there's still a good project, still aligned with European goals or sustainability goals, you know, there's lots of funding options that are out there, so don't be discouraged. Corian.
Yeah. Or Irish political ambitions, of course, if you want to go for an Irish grant. That's also the possibility. So zooming on life now, after this introductory minutes. So what's life? Life is a cash grant. So that's the good news. So you can get cash amount in order to execute your projects. And these projects should be focused at either environmental actions, environmental activities, or climate actions. Those two topics, these are the main topics that are covered by a LIFE project. And then well, the structure is quite easy. You can see it here within the environment. You have two sub-programs, nature and biodiversity, and circular economy and quality of life. Whereas in the climate action, you have the climate change mitigation and adaptation, and clean energy transition, an important program. What we see over the years that there is a shift in life from budget. Well, in the past, the budgets were higher in climate and less in the environment, but nowadays we see a bit of shift towards the environment. So the environment has a total budget. As you may know, the LIFE program has an, well, if you can go back 1 minute to the other slide. So the LIFE program has a duration of 7 years. This is a 7-year budget of 2.8 billion. And you see that the environment gets 1.8 billion, whereas the climate actions only get 1 billion. As Brian already mentioned, LIFE is meant for piloting and demonstration. So it's not for research and development. That's a very important message. So of course you can do some final development to set up your piloting experiment or your demonstration activity, and you can do there some development, but fundamental research is absolutely not allowed. And development should be in what they call then the preparatory activities. To prepare for the piloting activity. Now we can go to the next slide, and then zoom in a bit on the sub programs. As I said, environment, there is the nature and biodiversity, and circular economy. So I think that the title tells itself. You see the budgets also. 1 billion going to nature and biodiversity. So it's really an important topic in the LIFE, and about 700 billion going to circular economy, quality of life. And with that, circularity is also we see a big move towards that direction in the LIFE programs. In the climate action, you see a bit smaller, but still substantial projects, budgets in climate change mitigation and adaptation and clean energy transition. We think the budgets are a bit lower because you see in many other European funding programs, especially in the climate mitigation and in the clean energy transition, you see large budgets going to research and development, and that extends also quite far towards the piloting activities. So for clean energy transition, especially, you see really big budgets also in the Horizon Europe, for example. So that's why we think it's a bit less here. If we then go to the next slide. Within the sub-programs, there are some priority topics. And in nature biodiversity, you see them here, measuring, integrating the value of nature as a topic, about reversing the decline of pollinators. Last year, for example, I've done a very nice project on a new insecticide that is pollinator safe. So that's an example of a project that we could submit there. This kind of bringing nature back to agricultural land is a hot topic, of course, to increase the biodiversity. I'm just picking out some of these. And in the circular economy, you see sustainable road transport, water quality as important topics, resource efficiency, so recycling a resource to decrease the need of scarce resources. Of course, it's really important topics up to the quality of the soil in agricultural lands, of course, mainly, and noise. So here you see some of the topics. It's good if you can make a link with this kind of priority topics. So you should some way or another try to make a connection with your project in one of these priority topics, because these are obviously the ones that the European Commission likes to have addressed. And if we then go to the climate action sub-program, there you see also a number of priority topics. Heating and cooling. Just last week I read an article. I think every second there are I don't know many cooling systems installed, and of course they all have a quite big impact on the environment, on the use of energy and heating. Addressing energy poverty. is an important topic nowadays. Well, especially with increasing gas prices, I think it's a political topic also. Well, making the energy transition up to mainstreaming sustainable energy finance. So how to finance all this kind of transitions, how to make it possible for everyone to make the transition. And in the climate change and climate mitigation, typically those are the topics that we find back in the companies, many companies that invest in technologies that do something related to climate mitigation or adaptation. And there again, you see water management, well, actions to reduce greenhouse gases in all kind of production processes, for example. Yeah, tools and solutions for climate mitigation. Greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting is also a very important topic. And there you see big overlaps also, well, seemingly overlaps with, for example, programs as the Innovation Fund, where of course also the main aim is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So, well, if you have a demonstration project, or maybe it's already past or quite far in the demonstration phase, and maybe the project is too big, too large to fit in a live project, then maybe you should have a look at the Innovation Fund, because there is quite, as I say, a substantial seemingly overlap with this program, especially if you're significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions with your activity. Yeah, so far on the priority topics, I think Brian can move to the next slide. So we're zooming in on the project. So how are the projects? What they do look like? As I mentioned, the project should be an innovative project. So it should be a first time that that this kind of demonstration or piloting takes place in worldwide. It should be, I think, it should be worldwide. But it should be innovative compared to the state of the art on a worldwide scale. So that's something important to mention. And yeah, I started this that it should contribute to the European Green Deal policy ambition. So take notice of the European Green Deal, and also in your proposal very clearly state how it supports European Green Deal objectives. If you're not able to make that connection, I think then you're missing a good point in your storytelling. Yeah, the live main goals. Well, we mentioned, of course, already in the previous slides, but because it's important, I will repeat it here to make the shift, to help making the shift towards a sustainable, circular energy, safe and renewable energy-based, climate-neutral economy. So I want to stress also the word economy, because, yeah, one way or another, it should also, if you demonstrate a new technology or a new activity, it should also be economically sustainable. So that's also something. So it's not only sustainability in the term of environment and climate, but in the end, yeah, it should also continue after the project. And then, well, you have to look how that works. Yeah, well, protect, restore, enhance our environment. Of course, that's a topic. That's the main topic of this call. Biodiversity loss reversion, very important. Connection with Natura 2000 network, defragmentation of Natura 2000 areas is a really important topic. And encourage and support green ideas from both large and small companies. So also companies, NGOs, public authorities, citizen group, academia can participate in this program and should be supported to become more green, so to say. So if you look how is your proposal evaluated, then there are important criteria. 4 criteria. It's evaluated on 4 criteria. So relevance, how does it fit to these main goals of life? The quality of the proposal, I will zoom on it in the next slide. What will be the impact of your project, and how will you be able to actually execute your project? So what are the resources available to execute your project? So you should score maximum points on all of these criteria. I mentioned, or Brian mentioned, our success rate, and we do have a good success rate. We do have an excellent success rate, but the overall success rate of life is around 20%. I think in the last round, 15%, 20%. If you look to all applications submitted versus the ones that are selected for funding, only 15% scores. And that is because most probably they score on some of these items very good, but then they miss out on others. And yeah, it is European grant application. It is competitive, so you should score on all criteria in an excellent way. And that's why we always focus in our applications and support of applications on all criteria to get the maximum points. So zooming in on that in the next slide. Well, not on the criteria, sorry, we first have another slide. So on the beneficiaries, I mentioned already something on it. You cannot submit as an individual, so you should be a legal entity. So you should be either a public or a private body, a legal entity registered in an EU country, in an EU member state, or one of the listed associate countries. So Norway, Switzerland. UK is, for the moment, I'm not really sure. I think officially they're still in discussion whether or not they participate. I don't know the status. Norway is also not part of the European Union, so it's often an associate state that can contribute. Likewise with Switzerland, for example. But I know also Switzerland is still in negotiation with the European Commission on their participation in this program, but also in other European funding programs. The coordinator must be established in an eligible country, so one of the EU member states, or an associate state also. So that's really important. Yeah, before submitting the proposal, you have to register. So they changed the submission procedure a bit. So they're now making use of the EU funding portal. And that's a bit different. In the past, there was the e-portal of LIFE itself. Now they're using the Horizon Europe portal or the EU funding portal. For that, in order to be able to access that, you have to and to be registered. You have to be registered. You need to have a participant PIC code. Participant identification code, and it's not a difficult procedure, but you have to do that in advance before you can be administered in the system. Applicants must have stable and sufficient resources in order to be able to participate. Typically, you have to submit some data in that registration process. But the final check on that will be in what we call the the status where you have contract negotiations with the European Commission. So after you have submitted, then it's evaluated, and when your project is positively evaluated, you get into an contract negotiation phase, and in that stage, the financial capacity of your institute or company or organization will be checked. Likewise, you should have operational capacity, of course, to execute the project. There are also exclusions. So if you're, for example, close to bankruptcy, binding up, or there's other illegal stuff going on, well, then of course you're not allowed to join these kind of funding programs. That on the beneficiaries, maybe
So,
we didn't.
No, sorry, Corian, just to clarify in terms of the messages coming through there, if anyone's been keeping an eye on the chat, it's just been clarified that the UK, including Northern Ireland, who I suppose been our closest neighbour and often first port of call when we're looking for partners in life projects in the past, unfortunately they're not going to be associated with the life call. So I suppose we'll be looking for a new set of partners in Ireland or somewhere for replication. So
okay, thank you for that elucidation. Yeah, what we didn't mention yet on the beneficiaries is you need only one beneficiary. So for life, you can submit on yourself. You don't need per se other partners in other countries. So that's a good news on life. However, what you want to make, and when you want to make or prove your European impact, you may need extra partners, but well, it's how you organize it. Yeah, so on life knows different types of projects, standard action projects, strategic projects, and technical assistance projects. Well, in this presentation, we will focus mainly on the standard action projects. The strategic projects and technical assistance projects are a bit the exceptions. Also, the deadlines for the first round have been passed. There are more specific projects geared toward well, specific biodiversity mitigation actions, for example. Whereas in the standard action projects, well, these are much wider, much more bottom-up programs, and well, also the big budgets are going there. So, so we're focusing on the standard action projects, and that these have a deadline is now open for submissions. I know that some of you, well, from the survey, we know that some of you are actually working towards applications to that deadline of the 30th November of this year. So yeah, most of what we're going to tell is focusing on this standard action project. Go to the next slide. Yeah, then again, the criteria, well, a bit different stated. Yeah, of course, the key priority is that that should have an impact on the well, it should focus on an environmental effect. That's what you want to demonstrate in your project or to pilot that effect. There already you see that supporting quantitative data is required, and that's really important. So you want to have you want to demonstrate the impact, so you have to measure what will be the impact, and in order to measure it, you have to quantify it. You already in the estimation, so in the application phase, you should some way or another try to quantify the potential impact, and that's often that's not easy. So you have to estimate the impact, and then of course in the piloting activities, in the demonstration activities, you're going to measure and see whether you yeah, achieve that estimate, and that's basically what you do in a live project. So it's really important to make it as quantitative as possible. In order to prove that high sustainability impact or the environmental impact, whatever it is that you're going to prove, demonstrate. As we say, it's innovation is also an important criterion. So it should it should make a leap beyond the state of the art. At the current state of the art. So it's very important in a live project that you start by telling what is the baseline, basically. So what is happening now? What is the state of the art? And it can be a technological state of the art, but it can also be kind of other kinds of state of the art. So it's the baseline, what's happening now in a certain environment. And also, in order to demonstrate what is the innovation, it's always good to look at competitors also. So, what are others doing in that field? How are you going beyond that? So you should also very well describe, what's happening around you. That's the last point, what I mentioned already. The demonstration, the technology that you demonstrate, the action that you demonstrate, the activities that you do, they should also continue after the grant ends. And for example, if you have a new product and that reduces greenhouse gas emission, and you say, well, we're going to demonstrate the product, then you should have a good go-to-market plan. So how are you going to put that product in the market after the live project, and how does it look then? But also, if it's not a product, it can be a service, or it can be for example, we have done a project in where they changed in a rural area. They made it more green, more sustainable, and then is the question: so if you have done that in the life period, how will it sustain after the life period? So how do you prevent that it returns to the old situation? So you need some kind of business plan there, how to generate income, and it doesn't matter where that income is coming from. But you need to have some kind of business plan how to generate income in order to sustain the project, the activities also after this live project. Okay, next slide. So this is a summary. Well, this is the content of the proposal. Well, just to give you a flavor what's needed in the proposal, and then we will zoom in the next sessions. We will zoom in on all this kind of topics, but you see already two major parts. That's the administrative forms. So that's who are the beneficiaries, who are the participants, what is the budget. Basically, that's in the administrative part. So you have to describe yourself. And then a bit, but just registration and stuff like that. And then you have the B forms, and that's basically the project description of the project, with the background of the project, the potential impact. How are you going to execute it? They're calling that the implementation with a work plan. How are you going to do it? So who is going to do it? What are the resources? How is the consortium? What are the partners participating in it? And some other items such as ethics and security that might be involved. As I said, you have to measure the impact, and that's in the format of KPIs. Key performance indicators that you have to clearly state and follow in your project. to fulfill. And then last but not least, of course, you have to make some kind of budget. So what is the cost that you're going to make in the project, and what is the part that you receive from the funding then, and which is the part that you bring up yourself, the matching, co-financing. Yeah, in the next slide, so this give you already a flavor. I think I've tackled most of this. So again, you see the 4 award criteria. So it is a summary. You see different weightings on this criteria. I didn't mention that yet. So there you see again that you see that impact is the most important chapter because it's weighted the heaviest, and yeah, the quality of the impact chapter, how you describe that, so is really important. But again, well, if you have a very good impact and a very good relevance, but you don't describe very well how you are going to do it in the quality part, yeah, then of course you're still missing out in the resource part. So that's very important. Yeah, I think I'm not going to mention a lot on this because we're zooming in on this all this kind of topics quite extensive in the next sessions. What is important is that there is consistency over this all these topics. So if you start with describing the relevance of the project and it leads to a certain impact, of course that should be all connected to each other, and that's already something very important. And also sometimes it sounds logical, but yeah, especially if you see that different people are writing on the different chapters. You see there are a lot of paragraphs and chapters in the application. We see often that the connection between the different chapters, yeah, sometimes is a bit lacking, and that's an important thing to start with. Is already to have yeah, so the kind of project outline in which you try to yeah, to bring a kind of red line in which you address, well, thinking about the criteria, how to fulfill the criteria, but still already having a storyline that connects all these criteria also. So that's very, very important. So from idea to up to impact, yeah, it should be a very clear storyline. Yeah, that's on this slide, I think. Yeah, then you can get some extra bonus points by addressing some specific items. So it's good at it because so take care of these bonus points. So if there is synergies between different LifeSub programs, you can get extra points. Yeah, if your proposal offers an exceptional catalytic potential, well, that's a bit vague, of course. Well, I think what they meant to say, if you do something, if you demonstrate something in your project that has a big impact, but also then you're talking about transferability and replicability of your demonstration or piloting project. And if it has a huge replication impact, yeah, then potential replication potential, then it's the catalytic potential. And of course, that's then you can get extra points. Yeah, if there's transnational cooperation in your project, and often that's a more easy one. So if you have some partners outside Ireland, so you are the applicant in Ireland, and you have some collaboration partners in other member states, then you get 2 extra points. Also, if you connect clearly to other EU projects, so I said you know, it's a piloting project, it's a demonstration project. So it might be that you have done before another, for example, an Horizon 2020 project or an Eurostars project, and this project builds further on that project, then also you get extra points, because of course that's what the European Commission like to see. And then last but not least, if you have your project implemented in what they call outermost regions, these are specific regions where there is a specific environmental problem, basically. Well, as example, the coal-intensive regions, for example, where they have their energy supply only from coal-fired power plants, and you want to help them to make the transition, especially focused on that region. Then or that type of regions, then also you can get 2 extra points. So it's always good to look at this, because well, extra points make you distinguish from your competition. Okay, so go to the next slide, and then you see, I think, the overview of the points that you can get. So here you see indeed, well, on relevance, impact, quality, resources, you can get all 20 points, but it's not correct. I think on the impact you can get 30 points. Well, it's so times 1.5. So that's the weighting. So in essence, you get 20 points for relevance, quality, and resources maximum, and then on impact 30. So it makes 90 points, and then you can get 10 extra points in on the bonus points. You need a minimum score of 55 in order to achieve the threshold. So if you score below 55, then you're not in the competition. But even if you are above the threshold, you're still in competition with all other projects that are above the threshold. So for that reason, you want to be as close to the 100 points as possible. That's what you should try to achieve, of course. Okay. So far, this slide.
Sorry, Corianne, I was on mute there. So yeah, I think we were scheduling a break after this for about 15 minutes. But I suppose we'd sent out the pre-attendance questionnaire, and there were a number of kind of common questions that were coming back. So Corianne, maybe you could address some of them now. I suppose one of them being in terms of what's required in terms of the project scale. You know, typically what kind of level of investment do we see being successful in projects, and are there limits within that?
So officially there is not a maximum on the size of the projects, but yeah, I know that from statistics of all over all live programs that have been published by the European Commission itself, the average funding provided is 1.5 million. So if it's 60%, so you have a project somewhere between 3 and 5 million, or no, somewhere in a range of 3 million. So that's the average project. Most projects we do, I have to say, are somewhere between 3 and 5 million, so a bit above the average, I think. Yeah, so that's about the project size that we see most on total budget of the project. There's a minimum of project size. I think it's 500,000, but we don't see these scoring quite often, because they're most probably the European impact will be limited. But of course, if you have a relative small project, so say a project with a total budget of 1 million or a little bit below 1 million. And you can demonstrate a good European impact or potential impact, even if the impact in your project is limited. But you can prove that there is a very good replication potential, and it's you can make it very viable. You have a strong case to build that replication potential. Then, of course, a small project also may score. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a huge project, so a project that is going over a budget of 5 million, then also the impact should be huge. And it should make a significant improvement. And then also, I think you should have a look again on the innovation fund, because typically we see that the big industrial projects are more in the innovation fund, because then in the huge projects, and often you're talking about industrial projects, and that's we see a better fit in innovation fund often than in life. So maybe this gives some insight on the size of the project. And the size in terms of consortium, as I said, often you can submit, you're allowed to submit on yourself. So you don't need, officially, you don't need a consortium. However, more often we see, at least some partners, some European partners. And most often we see, in terms of dissemination or, so often it's a technology developed by a company, but then there's an end user that might be a big company, a multinational that already demonstrates it on some locations in Europe, for example, or it can be some action that you do in a certain region, some area, some natural area that you change, but then you need maybe some nature organizations that spread the word and do some dissemination activities all over Europe to demonstrate and to spread the knowledge about the project and the experiences. So in that sense, we see often projects, most projects having 3-4 partners, at least, something like that. That's a bit the size, but if you can execute the project on yourself, and also maybe you have a European presence, or you have possibilities to disseminate and exploit and replicate your activities all over Europe. Then there's no need to have all the partners. So we see consortia, but most often the consortia are not really big, in my experience. They are quite compact consortia.
Okay. Thanks, Will. I suppose there's a question in relation to a small community project with spend under 500,000. I suppose there's two things, I suppose, just to clarify, Corian, maybe, when we talk about the project budget, what duration is that over? Is it typically the length of the project within life?
Typically 2-3 years, sometimes 4.
So
exceptionally 5.
And the project spend would then relate to, or the budget is going to relate to that 3 to 5 years of the project then. Okay.
Yeah.
So the separate part of that then is, I suppose, for the smaller kind of community-driven projects as well. What are the key costs that need to be there in terms of co-funding then? Can labor costs be taken into that? They're factored into it, the consumables. I know we'll be touching on that in Sinead's.
Yeah, we talk on that in a later session, but indeed, all costs that you have to make in order to execute program, and that's as I said, it is sometimes also preparatory work, some development activities, but then also of course the piloting demonstration activities itself. So it's typically it's mainly labor cost. Yes, that's the largest component mostly. But it can be all kind of other costs. So materials that you need, congresses that you organize, symposia, workshops. So, and then of course you have travel costs, you have the site that you have to hire, sometimes materials that you need, sometimes you need sensors in the field. You need software to analyze. Well, I cannot imagine any cost that does not fit, almost. So all costs that you need to do in order to execute your piloting or demonstration project is eligible for funding.
Excellent. Thanks for that.
Again, we will come back in more detail later on.
Yeah, so I think the other kind of key or trend that we were seeing in the questions that were coming through was in relation to partners and consortiums. And I suppose you covered in detail in terms of, you know, it's not strictly required, but there is a benefit and a bonus in terms of having the consortium, and especially then when there's a transnational kind of element to that as well, where there's
maybe good to mention, if we're talking about the transnationality, then we're talking about beneficiaries, right? So a partner as a beneficiary, and that's something different than a partner that is a third party, a contractor that you pay 100%. So often we see also contractors that you need, and that's also allowed. So you need to have done some work, and then you hire a party to do the work, and you pay them for that. That's a contractor, but that's not considered a partner, a transnational partner in that sense. So when it's transnational, it's really a beneficiary. So that means that partner contributes to the project for their own risk and benefit. So that means that partner that make also cost, and only part of the cost will be covered by the grant, and that's what's then the partner in a project.
Okay. And does that include stakeholders as well, then, Corianne, where you've, I suppose, an informed party who will have an interest in the results of the project?
Yeah, well, it's very much appreciated, how do you say it, advisable to have the stakeholders in your project or representatives of your stakeholders. So end users are very, very important in your or potential first movers, end users, the stakeholders. How do you want to mention them, to call them? These are really, really important to include them in your project. And well, sometimes it's an end user board or something like that. I don't know, a stakeholder board. And so they're a bit on a distance. It depends a little bit where your project is moving, if it's really already, but more often, it's very much advisable to have actually these stakeholders as partners or representative organizations of these stakeholders as partners in your project. It's a demonstration project. You want to demonstrate the technology, and at the site where it will be implemented in the end, that people will implement the technology or the action or the service also after the project. And if those people where you want to implement it, or those organizations where you implement it, are not in the project, you will have a hard case to sell the idea that it will sustain also after the project. So it's very much advisable to have these in your project, yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that covered the main kind of themes of questions that we had. I suppose some of them were then, I suppose, more aligned to more specific aspects. I think anyone that was signed up to the individual one-to-ones, if you haven't been contacted yet, we will be contacting you and trying to put a date in the diary over the course of the next week or so. And yeah, we can address any of those specific concerns at that stage. So that's brilliant. Corian, thanks very much for that initial overview. You're not quite off the hook yet. We'll be coming back and talking about the proposal in further detail. But we're just going to propose a quick 15-minute break. So maybe if we give people the chance to grab a cup of coffee and come back at 10 to maybe. So it's 10:37 now. If we're back at 10:50, pick up from there.
Yeah.
While you're on break, if anyone wants to contact us with any questions, the chat function will still be open, so please feel free. Okay. Corian, thanks very much again. We'll chat in 10 minutes or so.
See you in 30 minutes. Yeah. Recording is in progress. I hear. Because as I mentioned, well, the way of applying for life has been changed, and I can imagine that yeah, if you're not familiar with the application portal of the European Commission, it might be a bit confusing. So first, where you have to go, and that's important, is to the funding and tender side of the European Commission. If you just Google on funding and tenders, then automatically you get to the page that you see on the left side. And on the left top corner, you then see search funding and tenders. So there is a search box. And in that search box, you can search for the live program or sub-program, because you have to submit at the sub-program level. So the live sub-program that you're interested in. So how do you search? Just type in the box with the looking glass, live-2021-SAP from what is it, Standard Action Project. And then you will find well, a number of calls, and as you see on the right side, well, it's the left picture. It's very small. I cannot see it on my screen, but anyway, then you see a number of calls, and then you have to pick the right one, click on it, and then on the bottom you get the image on the right side where you can actually start submission. And by clicking that one, you enter then the right call for proposals of the live program. So it's important to select the right sub program, or otherwise, it gets at the wrong evaluation committee, and that's what you don't want. In order to be able to actually start that submission, so you're there, you log in. You have to you have to register at the European Commission first. Otherwise, you're not able to log in. And if you register, you get that PIC code as a company or as an organization. And only with that PIC code, the participant identification code, it's possible to add your organization in the application. Well, you need at least to add one organization in this first box. Otherwise, you cannot continue to the Create Proposal tab. So it is possible to add other partners. So it doesn't matter if you only have your own organization as a coordinator. You add your PIC code. You add your organization. You can also search on the organization name, and you add it there, and then you can continue with the application. Later on, you can go back and add other organizations. So that's not a problem. as long as you have at least one. Otherwise, you cannot continue in this screen here. And well, then you go to the next slide, and there actually you get into the proposal creation page, so to say. And there you see basically two so actually you pass the administrative forms, and then you get access to the B forms that I was talking about, and you can there also download a template that you can use to fill. As said, the administrative part you have to fill directly on the site, but the B part, well, you write basically in Word, and then you make a PDF, and then you upload that form into the portal. Very important, uploading the document in the portal is not enough. You always will have to submit, to press the submit button. It happens quite often that people think they have submitted, but then they only have uploaded everything, and that's not enough. So you have to push the submit button and get a confirmation that the project is submitted in order to actually have submitted your proposal. So that's very important. Before you submit, you can also there is the validate option. So we push the validate button, and then you see whether it does the automatic check whether you have filled all administrative forms, the mandatory fields, and you've also attached all attachments that you need to do. So it's an easy check. It's validate, and then well, you see whether everything is green, and if something is still red, then you of course you have to resolve that. After submission, so if you submit before the deadline, of course, you can always resubmit new versions. So what we typically do is we submit already our application maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the deadline, and then continue working on it, and then keep on resubmitting new updates all the time, up to the date of the deadline most often. What we see quite often with European applications is that on the last day of the submission, it can be very busy, can be very crowded on the portal. And then, well, it happens sometimes that the system becomes that slow that you want to submit something, but it doesn't happen anymore. You see a timer going round and round, and nothing happens. So for that reason, and sometimes often because of that reason, then they postpone the deadline 1 or 2 days. But anyway, better be safe than sorry. So we advise strongly to submit at least 2 days before the deadline. And it's even on the site of the European Commission itself, they say it. Please submit at least 48 hours before the deadline to avoid that problem on the deadline date. Because you don't want to run into the situation that is your first submission on the deadline date, and the system is so slow that your application comes in too late. Because too late is really too late. Then there's no way to recover that. So you can submit by pushing the submit button. Very important. If it's not complete, you get a message. If it's complete, you get this message that it's submitted, and you can resubmit as many times as you want up to the minute of the deadline. That's about this, I guess. I think I saw a question passing. Is adding supporting documents a good idea? Yeah, Supporting documents in the terms of letters of intent. We see quite often expressions of interest, for example. If it's real extensive documents, unless you want to make a clear statement, for example, on the technology readiness, you add, for example, a technical viability analysis or whatever. Long documents typically are not read by the evaluators. They have already a lot reading to do with the application, and they will have a quick look at your attachments, but don't expect that they are really going to read it. It should be visible. The attachment is to be used as just something that gives a message by a quick look at it, and not really if there's essential information in that document, you should put it in the application itself.
I suppose just touching on that point as well,
and then,
Corian.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, just in terms of letters of support from local bodies, be it here the EPA, National Park and Wildlife Services, you know, any government bodies that are you know, potentially going to be involved or impacted or in the project as a stakeholder. I'd say we would always encourage that those kind of agreements and letters of intent, they don't have to be, I suppose, legally binding, but showing that there is you know, support there beyond just the project participants as well.
Yep.
Are you supposed to have there? And just was
I
one
see
other
one other question. If there's multiple sub-programs, do you have different picks? No. The participant identification code is a code you get as an organization or a company, and it accounts actually for all applications that you do. So you get one single pick for every application that you do via the EU portal.
Okay. I see there's a follow-on question from that as well in terms of the number of different headings. So, be it nature and biodiversity, climate change and mitigation.
You have to choose. You have to choose.
Yeah.
You should choose one and then make clear that it has strong links with the other program, and actually you get extra points for that. So that's good.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, I suppose we might give you a couple of minutes break, Corian, from speaking, but please feel free to jump in with any points you want to raise as we go through this. So I suppose Corian has covered in good detail in terms of the type of projects that are there, what would make them, the various different areas where projects can be, I suppose, under in terms of the topics and how they have to align. I suppose at this stage now you should have, I suppose, given a good amount of consideration to the actual project that you have as an applicant. And I suppose really it's setting out about what are the essential elements of a project that's going to qualify for life. So we've spoken about the various, I suppose, topics that are there, but also thinking about the practicalities of the project itself. I suppose looking at what are your expected start and end dates, what's the timeline of the project. Like Corian had mentioned before, that, you know, a project is typically 2 to 3 years. You know, extending out to 5 years is possible depending on the project scale. You know, have you considered in terms of what the objectives are over that course of time, and also looking at it in terms of what actions are going to be undertaken, what work will actually be done, and how's that going to link into the budget. I think one thing that you'll notice, and it sounds like a lot of repetition as we're all talking through various different aspects of these applications, but there has to be a link throughout the entire application. So looking at it not just in terms of one individual section, but how does that link into the budget? How does that follow on to, you know, between what you've talked about in relevance and then into impact, how that carries through. But it's amazing as well as you go through the process of putting an application together, how these things will move around. And, you know, as you put more thought into, well, who's actually going to be doing what work and when, you know, what can be undertaken by the organization itself, what will you need third-party input for, and subcontractors. So these are things that you need to be constantly considering throughout the entire application process. As well as that, it's linking it back to the call itself. I mean, it's important to remember your application, you're looking for the European taxpayer to invest in your project. And so within that, there are certain rules that have to be met. So I suppose we're going to talk about, you know, the relevance of the project, the impact, you know, how you're going to implement it, what resources are there, and what budget are you going to have for that. But you also have to link that back then to the priority areas, and they're all set out within the call document. So it's really important, if you are considering it, look at the call documents that are there, look at the monthly annual work packages, and you know, have a good understanding in terms of how your project is actually going to align to the requirements. Because I suppose you're pitching for investment here, to be kind of crude about it. You need to be excited about it. It has to be a good project that you're going to get people to buy into and want to basically invest in. But it also has to be, I suppose, realistic, because the EU needs a good return on investment on this, and it needs to show that, you know, all of the correct priorities are there, that the right funding instrument is being used to provide you with this funding, and that it's going to be used on, you know, actual, you know, actions that will, you know, stand out in terms of best practice, and for the you know, actually be the best methodologies in use to undertake the goals that you're setting out. Corian had also mentioned a number of times in terms of the state of the art and setting out the baseline. So, you know, looking at how you're quantifying your innovation, how you can set out and measure the impacts that you're looking to achieve. So when we're talking about objectives, you know, you need to be able to quantify them, give an example of what kind of results you're expecting to see at the end of the project, and also that those results can be put across, I suppose, other jurisdictions. I mean, if you've got two projects that are in a similar area, you know, have I suppose, similar points by the time that they're looking at it, but one project is looking at a small area, you know, be it the west coast of Ireland or the Midlands, and another project is covering 2 or 3 countries in, you know, the Nordics or Central Europe, then obviously the countries that have that transnational approach to it, that have the I suppose, show a better return and show that it's actually transferable across to various different regions, are going to be at an advantage. And these follow through then in terms of the KPIs that Corian would have mentioned about before as well. So this is really in terms of, you know, what results you're going to see, how they align, especially with the Green Deal, you know, and the various different policy and directives that are there from an EU perspective, because you have to align to those criteria. And as Corian also mentioned before, looking at afterlife, again, it represents poor value for money if the EU is going to invest in a project that will simply end with their funding. They need to see a credible plan afterwards that's going to show that there's going to be a lasting benefit, and be that, you know, following into further, you know, be it the innovation fund, or be it funding, or, you know, other types of funding, how you've built on other research that's been there, if there's been any kind of a Horizon 2020 funding that has been received for projects in the past, or, you know, the SME fast track to innovation, how you're building on those projects and showing. These are all the things that you need to consider as you're putting the application through. So what we're going to do is break it up into the various different aspects, and I'm just going to cover off in terms of relevance. So first of all, what do we mean by relevance? Well, I suppose we're talking about relevance to, you know, the life objectives, looking at how it links in with the various different sub-projects, you know, how it fits into the actual call itself. And then looking at the intervention logic, so showing that, you know, it's the most relevant kind of criteria that's being used, or methodologies that are being used in undertaking the project. And then finally, it's really looking at how it ties in with other European, you know, policy objectives, and you know, what are the synergies that you can achieve at, you know, a local level, be it, you know, climate action policies in Ireland, or whether it's you know, at a wider European level. And these are the kind of areas that you need to be looking at in this section. And we go through each one bit by bit. So I suppose, as we mentioned, the typical kind of success rate is around 15%. So you're in competition with an awful lot of different companies and applications from across Europe. So these are some of the kind of successful projects that the team in Deloitte have worked on over the last couple of years. And just to give you a sense in terms of, where they fit in terms of the overall relevance and setting out problems and the objectives that you're trying to set out. So I suppose if we look at the first project here, which is a project that involved AB InBev in Belgium and BDI in Spain, and there was another Spanish partner involved in the project as well. They were looking at, I suppose, brewers spent yeast. So it's 15% of all byproducts from the brewing industry. It's a massive waste stream there at the moment, and there's an awful lot of while it's nutrient rich and while it's got loads of really positive kind of constituents within it and compounds that can be exploited, it's a nutrient rich, wet, warm byproduct that spoils very quickly and goes off, and it's a major waste stream then as a result of that. So looking at, I suppose, the project itself and what they were hoping to do, it was trying to take value from the resultant waste material. So looking at those constituents within it, looking at the yeast cell wall, which has huge potential value for animal feed supplements, and looking at partially autolyzed yeast, which is an input in winemaking, and then looking at various kind of bioactive peptides which are used in cosmetics and food industry. They needed to find an innovative way of dealing with that was going to be economical. So when we looked at it in terms of, I suppose, the relevance then that we were talking about, it's a transnational project. They were able to show that there were partners from Spain, from Belgium, who were able to feed into this. Also, the result of this could be applied across, the entire brewing industry in all of Europe, if not internationally. It links into EU legislation in terms of the circular economy and looking at the Waste Framework Directive. And then it had sufficient scale in terms of the project. It was almost 4 million. There was a contribution of 1.6 million from the EU. So it fit within the call criteria at the time, and it was ultimately successful. If we look at the polystyrene loop project, polystyrene accounts for about 200,000 tons of waste each year. At the moment, over half of that is incinerated. 40% of that goes to landfill, and then the remainder is recycled. Now, as a product, it is really full of noxious chemicals. It's not easy to recycle. It is, especially made more difficult by the fact that there's a requirement to have fire retardant on these, which puts in more chemicals and makes it even more difficult to recycle. So I suppose Sinbra in this case worked with a number of companies to try and develop, I suppose, a new recycling process, and developed a demonstration plant that worked on site. So that was able to deal with 3,000 tons per year. They were creating, I suppose, a new recyclable material from that, and they were extracting bromine from that as well. So I suppose from that perspective, again, it clearly showed that it was in line with EU policy because it's in the Waste Frameworks Directive. It's a circular economy because it's to do with recycling. But it also meant that it was in line with REACH regulations as well, because of the handling of materials and the fact that the whole thing was able to be recycled again and brought into further use. So it also had, I suppose, that transnational approach, given that it's a European-wide problem, with an easy justification to it. But it also had partners in Germany and in the Netherlands as well. And then finally, there's the acid whey project that was undertaken in Slovenia. So I suppose looking at whey, and most people are fairly familiar with whey protein powders, or at least I've seen people consume tubs of it. I suppose that's the protein-rich fraction, that's left. What's taken from that is there's often an acid whey component that's not as easy to remove. I suppose in the case of Slovenia, where the project was undertaken, there was 150,000 liters of this, 150,000 tons of this product that was ending in their sewerage systems. Now that has a huge chemical oxygen demand. It's really it's a highly pollutant factor if it ends up in the water system. But it had to be dealt with, and was putting massive pressure on sewage systems. So again, how this links up with the relevance part of it, then if we look at it, it's tied in significantly in terms of EU legislation. So, you know, there was again the Waste Framework Directive and the circular economy aspect to it. I think one thing I didn't mention was they actually had a biodigester on site as well, so they were able to look at industrial emissions that were coming from that. But being clearly able to demonstrate and quantify, you know, the chemical loading that they were able to reduce it by, being able to show, you know, quantify the problem, quantify the base level in terms of knowledge, and then ultimately have something that's going to be replicable across Europe, especially for smaller scale organizations and dairies in this case, that would not normally be able to invest in the type of capital and infrastructure that's required to deal with this, you know, highly pollutant subject that's a byproduct from their stream. So I suppose we've covered off some of these points, but really just to go through them line by line, and I won't slavishly go through each line here. The slides will be shared after this session. But really the important points to get out of this are, you know, the background and general project objectives. You know, it's an opportunity to set out the problem that you're trying to address from a European perspective, set out how important it is, describe, I suppose, where the state of the art is, showing the level of innovation that's required, and how you're going to resolve the challenge as well. You know, having those objectives clearly set out and how you're going to address them with the work that needs to be undertaken. One point here is looking at the TRL, so the technology readiness level as well. I mean, as we've set out, life is really for pilot and demonstration, not so much for projects that are looking at the research side of it. So being able to clearly demonstrate that your project fits within the call criteria, that you're setting out what exactly the state of the art is, what the challenge that you're trying to address is, and then looking at the improved performance that you can get as a result of this work, and be that from an environmental, a technical, or an economic perspective. If we move on to the next part of it, then we look at the specific objectives that you're trying to achieve in undertaking the project. So here you're trying to link it specifically to those European policies and directives that we mentioned. So we've given the examples from the projects where we've worked on in the past, but it's important to look at it in terms of your project. What's going to be the best fit from this? How is it going to be scaled up? And, you know, being able to measure these objectives and then ultimately tie them through with how they're going to tie in with the actions, the budget, and all other parts of the application then afterwards. In terms of compliance with life, then I suppose it's really, again, being asked, how do you link in with those objectives? How do they link in with the calls and priority areas? So in the first session that we had this morning, Corianne called out, I suppose, a range of different topics that were there. These are the areas that the EU want to see targeted, and within this, making sure that they fit in within the Green Deal policy. You know, basically having them targeted and clearly showing that link is very important to getting good marks. I suppose looking at the concept, you know, looking at the overall intervention logic is really important. You want to be able to show that you're using the best knowledge available. that the methodologies that you're using are the right ones, or setting out clearly your rationale for using the approach that you're taking, and setting that out is again, it's important to set that out in whatever way you can, showing that you've put some actual thought into it. So is there a supply chain? Is it going to be achievable? We mentioned about who's going to be undertaking what work. These are things that are all going to be asked again and again. They're going to flow into the budget. It's important that you're able to justify that, because in the budget section, you're going to have to provide the justification for it. And in this part, you need to provide that justification that will link into the budget. So again, there should be a common theme running from each of the sections. And you need to make sure that flows properly throughout the entire application. I suppose looking at the scaling and how are you going to scale this, we mentioned smaller projects are kind of historically, statistically less likely to receive funding. Looking at the averages that Corian mentioned, where you've got the projects that are receiving over $1 million funding, these are the ones that are more likely to get the success within the funding. So I suppose, how are you going to scale, or how are you building up from previous research and showing the benefits there as well? And then how does everything tie in together? So does it complement, I suppose, national legislation? Does it fit in with the National Climate Action Plan? Does it fit in with other policies within life itself? So what are the synergies that are there? I suppose one of the questions earlier was in relation to the actual sub-program. Which sub-program do you need to put an application in? You're putting an application in under one, if it links over to others, it's really beneficial. So you need to be able to call that out, but also being clear in terms of whatever sub-program you're applying for, that's the one that you need to make sure you're hitting the key criteria and the priorities within that. So they're really the key points. I suppose if we were to summarize them, I suppose if you really want to know, set out like what is the key challenge that you're trying to address, and what are the specific objectives that are there, why do they link to life, and then how do they link in with other policies that you're going to be able to see a wider benefit for the EU to give them justification for those, to award that funding. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Susan, who will kindly introduce herself and talk about the impact.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Susan Hansen. I am a direct colleague of Corian in the Netherlands, and I have been a grants and incentives advisor for over 21 years now, and I have a lot of experience also with the European applications, including the LIFE program. And well, yeah, I've been asked to talk to you through the impact criterion. And yeah, you should bear this in mind, because what we see in European grants in general and in LIFE also specific is that applicants really are good at describing the relevance of their project, on how it will contribute to climate goals, or how wonderful their technology is beyond the current stage of technology. But they tend to neglect the impact, because have you ever wondered why the European Commission is looking, what they are looking for when funding European projects? And of course, it's great to have an innovative project, but what they really want you to do is that you solve a societal challenge. So they are looking for projects which will have a direct and concrete impact on Europe, on European citizens. And we know that in the past, there have been a lot of developments that were wonderful, but that did not reach the market or the end users, and did not have that much of an impact as such. So therefore, you have to realize that competition in EU funding is very strong, and only perfect proposals can be funded. So make the difference by writing an outstanding impact section. So talking about impact, what is impact? Because a common mistake is made in writing a proposal that the impact of a project is the result of the project. That is not the case, because of course they contribute to the impact, but it goes much further than that. So you have to describe in this section the impact section, that what are the effects of the project's results on scientific community, European citizens, the economy, your institution, and companies involved in your consortium. So it is much broader than just looking at the results of the project as such. But what impact can it make within the project, but also beyond the project, and how will you disseminate these results? And this is what they expect you to write in this section. It consists of several steps that you can see on the slide, and I will go into a bit more detail in a minute. But if we move to the next slide. These are two of the projects that I have been involved in. There are two live projects. One is called Souplesse, and actually it is one of our clients called Allseas. It is one of the major offshore pipeline and subsea construction companies in the world for oil and gas. And they decided to develop a project. Well, everybody has heard about the Plastic Soup Foundation, which recovers plastic out of the sea. But most of, because the perception is that a lot of plastic is being tossed in the seas by ships, for example, but actually that's not the case. The majority of the plastic is being moved to the sea out of rivers. And sometimes plastic is tossed in on purpose, but most of the time it is accidentally ending up in rivers, just blowing off the shore and moving into riverines. So what they would like to do is to develop a specific technology that can remove plastics. And don't just think that these are major plastics, it's also microplastics that can be removed with this specific technology from out of the rivers. And regarding to the impact part, they really had a wonderful project, which we actually thought would score really high, and they did. But they had struggled with the impact because of course, they tried it in, I think, 3 sites with different dynamics, with a more heavy pollution or a different current. So you have to demonstrate that it works everywhere in the world. But then again, they didn't think of the exploitation part of the project. So who is going to buy this? And are you going to license it, or are you going to sell, produce the technology and sell it? So we had to help them in writing this part, because this is also one of the parts that you need to take into consideration in your impact part of your application. And the same thing was true for the Nautilus project, which is one of our clients is called Europol Systems. And it is a leading logistics provider of reusable packaging in fresh food. So all the fresh vegetables are transported in crates, but once they're empty, they are collected, they are washed and dried and cleaned, and then they can be reused by the food chain again to put in fresh vegetables. And they developed a resource-saving technology. It was a washer combined with a dryer. And instead of using hot air to dry it, for example, they use a centrifugal technology to minimize gas and electric energy. And they actually developed it for their own use, to have an advantage on competitors. But that's, of course, not a really strong project regarding the impact part of your application, because Yeah, if you only develop it for yourself and there is no replication possibility, or you don't want to sell it, so it can be used anywhere to additionally save energy and water, the impact is not that big. So we had to discuss this and to see, again, how can we improve the impact. And what they did is they said, well, yeah, maybe for the first 2 years, we will keep it to ourselves to give us a kind of a competitive advantage. But then we will license the technology to our competitors and to everyone else. And this technology can also be used in different types of chains, not only the food chain, but there are more ways of using the dryer and the washer. So we had to think with them about how to improve their impact. Yeah, moving to the application form, to the next slide, please. Thank you. So if we're looking at the application form, it consists of a couple of parts. So first of all, you have to look at the ambition of the impacts. So you have to identify the effects of the project during the implementation of your project, so the duration of your projects, but also up to 5 years after that your project has ended. And you can, of course, come up with a lot of impacts and tell a lot of what your project might do during the project period and after. But it is also important, and that will come in the second part, to have credibility, which means that the statements that you make need to be underpinned by, for example, benchmarks or publications that you can refer to as to that they will underpin the statements that you make. And of course, no one will come after 5 years to see if you actually reached all these goals. But during your project period, you have to indicate specific indicators to see if your project is actually having the impact that you were planning to make. And you have to write that down in a different part of the application as well, but you also have to put it here under the impact part. This is really crucial because, yeah, you can say anything, but it needs to be credible. That is really important. If we move to the next slide, apart from the credibility, you also have to look at the sustainability of the project results. So how are you going to sustain the results after the funding ends? Because we've seen in the past that the European Commission funded projects, and during the project period, everything went well, but after the project ended, everything fell to pieces because they didn't think about how can we continue this project after the funding has ended, because LIFE is a project-related funding. It's not a structural incentive that you might receive over, let's say, forever. So you have to make sure that you are able and that you have thought through how to sustain the project results after the funding ends. And this could be, for example, that you have laid things down in IP, that you are going to maybe set up a corporation, or you are going to have a consortium agreement, what you're going to do after the project has ended, and you define tasks, or you are going to involve a specific other companies or organizations that can support you in sustaining the project results after the funding ends. This is really important, and it's also called in Horizon, for example, as an exit strategy, to make sure that the project doesn't fail after the funding has ended. And bear in mind that you have to write about how you're going to do that after the project has ended, but you also have to write activities that you will carry out during your project in order to secure the exit of your project. This is really important. And apart from that, the exploitation of project results is rather important. So do you foresee other ways of exploiting the project results? Can it be used, for example, in further research or in developing or marketing other projects or products, or in creating a new service? And what is important is that you do that with a market focus. So who are the targeted end users? And this could be a general public, it could be scientists, it could be potential customers that will buy your technology, or but bear in mind that life is a really close to market application. And the projects are about demonstrating specific things. So it is important that you specify your audience and how you are going to reach them. And apart from that, also look at your level playing field. So who are other players in this market, or how are you going to make to become how can you differentiate yourself from other players in the field, or are you complementary to specific other developments in the market? And these are the things that you need to address. That's really important. Yeah, I think that is, yeah, if we're looking at the catalytic potential, the replication factor is something that you really need to take into consideration and explain within your impact part. What do I mean? Well, I will give you an example. We had a client developing a new potato race, which can be grown on salt ground. That is really innovative. But suppose that you could only grow it in a certain area in the Netherlands, then probably the impact is not so great, because if you cannot do that anywhere in the world but here, the impact is rather limited. But if you can say it doesn't matter in what type of climate you are, as long as it is a salt based area, you can grow potatoes anywhere in the world. The replication factor is immediately way larger. But if you even could say, well, this technique that we have used for potatoes, we can also use for, well, beans, or for crops, or for brassica type of crops, then the replication factor is even bigger. So you need to take into consideration how much impact your project might have. And it doesn't mean that you have to take that into consideration during your project, because that is not the case, but it might, the things that you are developing and demonstrating might be used for other purposes as well. And it's really important. The bigger the replication factor, the better your impact will be. So bear this in mind, and also look at yeah, how are you going to share these results with the public and private actors, and to bring these results to people, because if you are just keeping it within your consortium, the probable impact will not be as large. So you need to write a communication dissemination part in which you address how you are going to share the results of your project with your end users / public. Okay, I think that is it for my part. I don't know if there are any specific questions, maybe.
So thanks very much, Susan. I haven't seen any specific questions come through on implementation. There are a couple of questions come through that we'll probably address at the end of the session, but I understand you might have a meeting to head off to. So if there's any specific questions that anyone has, if they want to put them into the chat function.
Yeah, there's one in the chat on we are a small community project, but we'll have a big impact on the community and in meeting European objectives. But life seems to be geared towards bigger organizations. Maybe you can address that, Suzanne.
Let me see. Yeah, that is not necessarily the case because, well, one of the projects I work with is actually not a rather a small organization. So it is not specifically geared to towards bigger organizations. I can imagine with the workload included in an application, it might seem that it is aimed at larger organizations. But as a matter of fact, in general, the European Commission is rather fond of smaller organizations and smaller projects that can have a large impact as well, because we know that innovation and out-of-the-box thinking does not normally necessarily come from big organizations. So no, as long as you have a small community project but have a big impact, this could be really relevant for a live application. So that doesn't matter.
Yeah, but the replication potential to other areas than your own community is, of course, very important.
Yes.
And so you should, one way or another, try to disseminate the idea and the results of the project to the wider Europe.
Yeah, I think the other point is then in relation to the actual scale. I think one of the points that was called out before is that the typical investment from EU is 500,000 or before it. So I suppose, again, going back to the slides that Corian would have gone through and myself in terms of, I suppose, other types of funding that may be available. You know, if the project isn't fitting neatly within the requirements for life itself, you know, have you looked at the Department of Agriculture? Is it SEAI, EPA kind of funding that might be available around there? You know, it's not to be, I suppose life isn't the be all and end all of projects. So, you know, maybe consider other types of funding that are available as well if you don't think that it's going to be a neat fit within life itself. But that's great. I see there's one, I suppose there are lots of volunteers, need help in the proposal. Yeah, I suppose in terms of volunteers, you know, one of the major costs as part of life is actually salary time as well, and the time that's put into it in terms of putting an application together. Like typically, Corian, what would we see? It's in excess of 200 hours. It needs a lot of time input into it as well. So yeah, it's just I suppose if it is what it is in some ways, it's you know, life isn't oh God, I was going to say life isn't fair. I'll try and avoid all puns from now on, but that's it. You know, Susan, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Sinead is talking about implementation now. So.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, just to quickly introduce myself. So I'm in the Belgian counterpart of Corian and Susan's team in Netherlands and Brian's team in Ireland. I've been working at Deloitte for 4 years, and also one of the roles that we play, so next to advising our clients in grants and incentives and IP strategy and so on, we also actively help them write these proposals. So of course, also live proposals. And today I've been asked to guide you through the implementation and the resources parts of the proposal. As Corian already mentioned, there are different award criteria that the reviewers keep in mind when review and assessing your proposal. And the implementation part is directly linked to the quality aspect, so the quality award criteria. They will assess the clarity, the relevance and feasibility of your work plan. They will see if you've actually thought about the relevant stakeholders and how you would mobilize them. And of course, maybe linking to Susan's part as well. How are you going to monitor and report the impacts? So really now you're really looking at the concrete actions that you're going to take, and which measures you're going to take to implement your project. So I will, just like Susan and Brian did, go through the different parts of the implementation part, starting with the work plan. In here, they're actually expecting like an overview of the structure of your work plan. So basically a summary of what is going to be written in the work packages, so that they have like in one page already, they understand what your project will be and what are the actions that you're going to take to meet your objectives that was written in the first part of your proposal. So it's really important that you're very concrete here, and also not, of course, going too much into the detail like you would be in the work packages, but like that they have a really good overview of what the actions would be. And then the next part, the stakeholder input and engagement, Brian already mentioned, and Corian as well, that it's very important to identify these stakeholders outside of your consortium. And these are actually the people or the organizations that you need, that are crucial for the success of your project. And in this part, you would describe how you would mobilize them, or which tactics you would use, what are the incentives for your stakeholders to participate in the projects, what are the benefits for them. And on top of that, here is it will be really an advantage for your proposal as well, that you could show a couple of letters of interest of these people or organization to show how committed they are to your project. And I think that's always a bonus for the project. Then yes, indeed, next, the work packages. Here in the proposal itself, there'll be a very clear template where you can describe your different work packages, who will be the beneficiary that will be responsible for that, what are the typical milestones, deliverables, of course, the list of tasks that would be included there, and also the time frame. So the idea here, and Koyan also mentioned this, I think this is a good first task when you're first beginning to think about, okay, I want to submit a live proposal. What is the outline of your whole whole project? And then you can start clustering all these activities into work packages and seeing if they're really logically and clearly structured. Try to avoid repeating different tasks in different work packages. It should be nicely grouped and all meeting to one specific or at least one set of specific outcomes or expected outcomes. And then it's also clearly mentioned that there should be one work package. Usually this is work package 1, that should be about project management and coordination, all the meetings that you will have, the progress reports that you will make, etc. And then, and this was also mentioned by Susan, oh no, sorry, this was mentioned by Corian as well, is the sustainability, replication, and exploitation of the results. That there is a clear work package describing what will happen after life. How will you sustain your project results after you've gone through this funded period? Because this is also something that they can see, like how measure what the impact of your of this project would be. And then the work packages should also cover how you're going to monitor and evaluate the impact. For example, if your project is about water purification or saving water, saving water, how are you going to measure the water saving that you have performed through this project? And then, but we'll come also to this in detail later on in the presentation. There should be also a work package about dissemination, communication of the project and the project results. And then, of course, a lot of administration here. There is a part where there's also a live KPI web tool that you have to fill in with all the key performance indicators. So you have to describe the different indicators and you will have to report them during the project. So also again, how you would take up this strategy and who would be responsible for that. So in general, a very important part of the proposal, because here they will really assess, okay, how logically and how feasible this work plan is, and if it's really well connected to, interconnected. So the work packages are interconnected and are have a clear connection with the impact and the relevance that is written before, or in this document. So I think we can move on to the next slides. Yes, that's a timetable. I would propose anyone, if your team or if you're resourcing it, outsourcing it, that the person who likes to complete Excel tables and likes to be the most analytic person, or should be responsible for it, because it's really filling out line by line per work package, or what are the different deliverables, milestones, and this will be also, it's also very, well, it is quite easy to put it to the portal, but again, you have to take your time. As Corian said, it's always good to start ahead with your proposal, but also already putting in all the data that is known, already put it in the portal so that it's already there. Because that's also kind of a time, a timely part of the proposal writing. So that, I think here again there is a clear template in the portal, and also in the proposal template, how you have to write in the timetable. And then, of course, as Susan mentioned, how important the impact is of your proposal. Here, you actually have to write the concrete actions you're going to take, the methodology that you're going to take to use to monitor and evaluate the impact indicators during the project. So first of all, you have to describe what those indicators would be and how you're going to monitor them. And again, see if this is linked to the actions that are written in your work packages, and to remain consistent, of course. And then communication and dissemination has already been spoken about quite a few times already today. Again, defining the target audience, who this is already indeed in sync with what the impact of your project would be, who will be impacted by this project, and in which extent. And then there's a clear distinction between communication and dissemination. So dissemination is specifically about your project results. So this is usually a different audience than your communication, or at least part of that audience. For example, if you go back to the water saving example, how would you disseminate those results to that target audience? Will you do it by articles? Will you do it by seminars? Will you do it by virtual meetings like this? And then really describing to whom, in which format, and so on, and or through which channels. And then communication is about the project in general. Again, which target, which channels you would use. And then very important is like, when you're doing this dissemination and communication, how are you going to monitor and evaluate the outreach, as it's the outreach of this of your and the coverage of the activities. So once you once you've given this information, it's important to collect the input of this audience as well. And how are you going to you use this information further to strengthen your project? And then lastly, also to ensure how you're going to ensure the visibility of the EU-funded project, so that people know that it's funded by the EU Commission. So next up is the resources part. Again, so while the implementation part was linked to the award criteria quality, we have the resources parts which has also a high impact on how it is scored eventually. So maybe the typical parts of the resources, of course, you would think about the consortium, so the team that is working. Yeah, you can go move on. It's not a problem, Ryan. So the team that is working on the project. So here you're looking at so when you have a consortium, I'm going to move parts of Korean already mentioned that it's always good to have a transnational team. It's always gives you bonus points. So we would recommend to work with the end users of the project, with the stakeholders as well. And in this part, you're really describing all the expertise of the partners and how are they contributing to the project, which roles they will take in the project, and also mention if they have the adequate the actual resources to fulfill that role as well. And then in the annex, there's always some place to put in more information about the different participants and about the different teams. Like that actually strengthens the fact that they have the right resources to fulfill their roles. And then the next part is project management. Here you, of course, write different management structures and how you're going to make decisions within the consortium, and make sure that there's a regular communication within the different teams, and basically just mentioning all the different methods and measures you would use for a very complete project implication or high quality project implementation. And then the green management next to the project management focuses more on the environmental impact of your project. So here you would mention all the type of management systems that you have in-house or the team has, the consortium has, that's linked to the environment, and that you really thought about what the environmental impact will be through this project. And then we can move on to the next slide, which is the budget. And I think there were a lot of questions about this as well. So here again, there is a budget table. I think it's an Excel table where you can write in the different costs, the direct costs of every beneficiary, whether it be equipment or what else was there? Equipment, infrastructure, travel costs, for example, for all these maybe not last year, but when you have to go to all these webinars and you need to have your travel costs. So everything linked to the project can be written there. All the costs can be included there. And then you have a clear view about what the different costs per beneficiary is. And next to that, you also have the costs for all the subcontracting actions. And here you always have to link them again to the different work packages and justify why you need these costs. And there is also a rule that the subcontracting costs can go above 30% of the total eligible costs. And if you have to go over the 30%, you'll have to give a valid reason, but we understood that it's always better for your project that you can stay under the limit of 30%. I think that is pretty much it, what I could tell about the budget now. and I think then we can move on to the risk management. Maybe we'll have some more questions after the presentation. Then the risk management, again, there's a nice table here in the proposal where for each work package you can describe the risks, the uncertainties, the difficulties you would expect to have. Of course, last year's, I think there was like almost always one paragraph that had the risk of the pandemic, of course, and how we would mitigate all the restrictions because of the lockdown. But it's crucial to have a good understanding about the potential risks and write them down and how they would impact the different work packages, and of course how you would which risk mitigation measures you would propose. And this actually shows that align with your project management activities, that you also have a good risk management strategy, and this gives an impression that your project is more solid and is secure when the reviewers are assessing it. And I think that's the last part of the resources. So any questions are welcome. Thank you. Brian, are you still there?
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just scanning through questions there for you now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Corian has been rattling through a few responses there.
Great.
I suppose there's a question, one question here in terms of should risks and mitigation measures be included for every work package?
Well, that's a good point. I think because they really they know that it's every project, even there's no such thing as a perfect project. So I think it makes sense that you can make up some kind of difficulty or obstacle for each work package. Then it shows that you are prepared for everything, I would say. But there is no strict rule that it says that you should write it, if that's your question.
Yeah, no, I
think that you should think about different types of risk. So technological risks, but also environmental and for example, the COVID crisis or other crises like that. But also if you're working in a consortium, it might be the risk that someone drops out of the consortium. So how are you dealing with that, especially if these are essential partners? So well, typically you can come up with some risks in every work package, I think, almost. But also, so risks is one, but mitigation measures, of course, is maybe even more important there.
And then in relation to the budgeting side of it and looking at the individual work packages that are there, I noticed there was one question in, but in relation to, I suppose, each individual work package, you know, I suppose typically how many would there be in a project, and is there an expectation that there'd be an even distribution of costs across the work packages?
That's, I think the length of the amount of, so the amount of work packages should indeed be in line with the complexity of the project, I think, because it's always good to have very structured work packages that you're not doing too much in one work package, and then that will already be in line with the costs that are related to it, because there are like depending on the equipment that you would need for work package 2, for example, would be more expensive than work package 3, where you're maybe just monitoring the impacts. So it's normal that the cost would fluctuate through the work packages. But I think Corian also mentioned this before, it's usually we see a compact number of work packages. Oh, no, that was for the consortium, but it's also the same for work packages. It gives a clear overview, I think, for the reviewer. But maybe Corian, you have any other experience in this case?
No, I think you're right. So an average project has something like 5 work packages. I think that's a bit the rule. And very complex, big projects may have 8. And straightforward projects might have 3 or 4, but yeah, that is about the bandwidth. And indeed, yeah, we see quite big differences in budgets between different work packages. That doesn't have to be so that might be completely different. It depends on the task and the work that should be done and the cost that you have to make. So there can be differences between work packages. Maybe important. Well, if you have collaboration partners, yeah, well, it's a bit strange if you say you do a project in collaboration and one partner has 95% of the budget and the other partner has only 5%. Of course, it is possible here because you don't need, formally, you don't need another partner, but there you like to see some balancing. So in typical collaboration projects, we say a partner can never have more than 70% of the project. I think in a life it might be a bit different, but that's also a bit of a rule of thumb, so to say. And then the other thing is, so you make a budget at the start of the project. Well, actually, half a year or maybe 7-8 months before the start of the project, because well, we didn't elaborate on it, I think, but you submit, you write your proposal. Then you submit 30 November. Then you get the evaluation period. That's another 4 months. So then you're talking about, what is it, April, something, April, May 2022. Then there is contract negotiations another 2 months. So probably you will start the project well, around summer next year. So now you're making plans for activities that take place from, well, say July 2022 up to, well, July 2025 maybe. So well, the European Commission understands very well that the plans you make now may, well, deviate over time. So world is changing, your plans are changing, maybe there's other input coming in, whatever. It's important, of course, that you still, your aim is the same, your goals are the same, you will go to the same end goals and aims of your project. But the way towards that end goal may deviate from your original plan. And that means that also the cost within your the different work packages may change then over time. So it is possible that within the budget limitations that you have, so you have been awarded a certain amount of money, but within that budget, it's quite well possible to shift with the budgets from one task to another or from one work package to another. So there's also, again, some flexibility, quite some flexibility, I have to say.
So I suppose then, what happens if something goes wrong within the project as well? Is that, I suppose, expected to be met within the risk management and the mitigating factors, or I suppose from clients that would have had successful projects and then I suppose a global pandemic hit, if you could imagine that happening last year. What was the impact that had on live funding? Were projects put on hold? You know, did the funding still come down at the same rate where there would have been a gap in activities? Was there an extension given in terms of the length of time?
Yeah, well, those kind of external factors, of course. Yeah, sometimes you cannot foresee it, and but indeed, so it's possible to ask for extensions of your project, and of course you have to elaborate on it, why it happened, and that it's beyond your powers, so to say. And they don't like it. The European Commission don't like extensions, but they don't like it because it happens in 80% of the projects.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening quite a lot. And they try to push it down as much as possible by asking you to make good and strong mitigation plans and risk analysis plans. But yeah, in real life, it happens all the time, and then you ask for an extension. Of course, well, with a live project, you have the obligation to make the effort. So you don't have the obligation to achieve a certain result. So you're not compensated for the result that you achieve in the project, but you're compensated for the effort that you make. And so that's something good to realize. So as long as you make the efforts as you have described in your original plan, or in the adapted plan, if you have made some adaptations over time, then you will be eligible for the funding. If then the result is different than you anticipated, well, that's all in the game. That's the risk of doing these kind of piloting and demonstration projects. So it doesn't have an impact on the amount of funding you will get. But if you don't do a certain effort, you stop the project halfway, for example, because partners drop out and you will not be able to execute the project further. Then of course, because you don't do the effort that you have promised to do, then also the funding stops at that moment.
That's
clear.
I think there was one further question in relation to the percentages of funding that can be achieved. And now obviously with nature funding, 75% is available if there's I suppose specific conditions that are met. Outside of that though, the funding rate, is there any flexibility on it in terms of, site specific kind of new technologies or anything like that, or is it limited?
I didn't have this experience yet before that the percentage had been increased because of those reasons.
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think it happens.
I think one thing to draw your attention to on that again would be the Climate Action Fund that Jerry spoke about earlier this morning, where there is that additional co-funding there. So sorry, there's clarification on the question there. Is meant for a single partner. I'm assuming then it's in relation to the 70% that was mentioned, Corian, in terms of, you'd said that there was a typical expectation of around 70% being directed towards one partner in a collaboration or a consortium. So like I said, that was an indicative kind of a figure. It's not set in stone in terms of what you'd typically like to see. Or actually, would you like to come? Sorry, there's a question being typed in here at the moment. If you want to come off mute and ask the question directly, it's probably easier than us trying to interpret it.
Sure, thank you very much, and apologies for the confusion there. Yeah, my question has, thanks. Yeah, my question has to do with the distribution between the partners, whereby you may have European partners on a transnational basis, but the percentage of distribution wouldn't be equivalent across the partnership across that partnership distribution, whereby in a particular case we might have project partners, for example, in Germany and France, but the percentage might only be for their part 10% and 10%, whereas the rest would remain within the host country at 80%. And is that logic still, can it still be applied if it's properly justified?
Yeah, it's not a problem for our life. So as I said, with common, most collaborative European projects, it will be harder to defend because there you have the 70% rule. So if you have twice 10% and then the other party has 80%, well, then the collaborative partner should not, is not envisaged as a real collaborative partner taking risk and benefits from the project, because then their role is considered too small. But in life, it's not an official rule that you have to collaborate. So any collaboration outside your own jurisdiction is perfectly fine. Yeah, I think if you properly describes what is the role and it comes out on 10% of the budget need, well, that's perfectly fine.
Thanks very much.
Brilliant. I suppose there was one further question in just in relation to that 75% rate. It is available in terms of the, I suppose for identified kind of habitat and species. I don't know, Corian or Sinead, have you come across that being triggered at any stage where the higher funding rate has been applied for?
To be frank, I have not met it at one of my clients.
No,
so
indeed.
we have to look it up. We have to look
Yeah,
it up.
there
Criteria.
are indeed specific criteria indeed, but we can indeed get back to you on that.
Yeah, so we'll make note of that and update on the slide in terms of what actually triggers that 75%. Okay, so I think that is all. Sorry, there's an answer back there.
Yeah, indeed, there is a list of species and habitats, but it's really specifically detailed in the guidelines what specific habitats we're talking about. So, indeed, so that as part of the nature and biodiversity call.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. So I think that's it on the questions. I haven't noted anyone else. If anyone wants to put any more questions in just at the moment now. If not, we might just continue on and conclude. So again, thanks very much, Sinead, for detailing and giving your time and for dealing with the questions that were there. I suppose just to touch on, I suppose, the main kind of conclusions and kind of key takeaways, and both of you feel free to jump in if there's anything that hasn't been covered on this. But I think one of the important points to get across is, you know, when you're putting your application together and looking at the structure of the report, that you set out clearly what the baseline is in terms of the initial problem and challenge that you're trying to address. And then that will allow you to expand upon that, looking at, you know, the corrective actions that you're going to take, or the actions that you're going to take over the course of the project. I think it's important then from everything that's been said in terms of setting out clearly what are your objectives, how they're going to impact on that baseline, and how they're going to operate throughout the entire project. Again, the actions that are being undertaken, who's going to be to undertake those actions, when are they going to do them, where it all fits in across every aspect of the application, be it in impact on the budget, you know, looking at the overall timeline, and as Sinead outlined, you know, you have to have these in a chart in the application. It's not just and then having costs associated with those. It's not just a case of putting them down and forgetting about them. They all have to link through and have that thread throughout the entire application then when it's being pulled together. I suppose the other point then is to think about, well, what are the actual results and how are you going to quantify them? You know, and then looking at the overall impact that these are going to have in 3 to 5 years. And not only that 3 to 5 years, but then afterwards, what's the afterlife kind of an impact on it? How are you going to put things in place that will ensure that the project doesn't end just with the end of funding? Again, I suppose just some additional remarks then in terms of what's being covered. The LIFE projects have to link into the Green Deal. You really have to link it back to the policy ambitions that are there. Try and show links to local policy as well where possible. You know, we already said about the sustainability of the projects. You have to be able to demonstrate clear value to the European Commission. It is European Commissioner tax money that's being paid over here. You do need to, they need to be able to stand over why they're giving this money away. I suppose, transfer and replication of the work. We've mentioned a lot about having multiple partners in projects where possible, ideally across European countries. You know, dissemination of the knowledge is not the same. I think Susan made some very valid points in terms of the impact. You know, it's knowledge that has to be shared and replicated. It's not simply enough to be able to tell about the wonderful things that you're doing, but also giving people the opportunity to implement these themselves. And then finally, I suppose, looking at the consortium itself, while there's no need for a consortium or have collaboration, you know, there are bonus points available there, you know, especially for transnational projects. You know, if you're saying that it's going to be replicated by others, it's really important to be able to show that, you know, you have other partners involved in this, and it's very difficult to have a solo project. And then I suppose just to conclude on one point is that, you know, if it turns out that your project doesn't fully fit within those criteria, there are a lot of other European and national types of funding that are available for it. So it's important, not like it's a fantastic scheme, but you know, there's certain scale requirements, there's certain technology readiness level requirements as well. It's not going to suit all projects yet. So if your project isn't at a stage where it's mature enough, you know, there are other types of funding that could meet that. So I suppose just to conclude then, thanks very much for the department and for allowing us to have this today. And thank you very much to Corianne, Snea and Susan on Deloitte. It's great to get their input and to have the opportunity to have those that insight that they're able to bring to it. And there's a huge amount of experience there across the team, so it's great to get that insight there. So that is it, I think. Thank you very much. For again, just a reminder for those of you who've registered for the one-to-ones, we'll be looking forward to being in touch with you in the next couple of days. But that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Corianne.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.